Welcome back to the ENCA Corruption Scorecard. One could ask, how do these accounting irregularities occur when professionals are paid to ensure all the books are in order? Our starting point this afternoon, I caught up with the CEO of the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants, Freeman Nomvalo, to get some answers on this question and a lot more. What did you do exactly with your bylaws that sort of enables you to hold professionals in your line of work among chartered accountants accountable where they are either complicit by their silence or actively aiding and abetting wrongdoing?
Yeah. Now, the real issue with our bylaws was that we had a number of things that would be minor infractions that had to go through a somewhat lengthy process than it is warranted. And we've now grouped all of those properly, and we have a shorter way to deal with those quickly. For instance, somebody has failed to comply with a provision to submit a certain return by a particular date. That may not necessarily be a big issue unless obviously it recurs regularly. So the first time that happens, you should be able to impose a penalty on that person instead of going through a disciplinary process. And the majority of the cases that we've had to deal with were cases in that space. So all of those cases now will be dealt with through a very straightforward process, very short process, that frees the resources in terms of people and time to deal with complex cases, and then we can be able to focus on those complex cases quicker.
Yeah, because, I mean, part of the requirements in as far as operating a business in this country is that you should have an accountant looking at your books and helping you report to organizations such as SARS and CIPC, and if you're listed, I suppose they'd also be helping you with the JSE processes as well. So yes, you understand the question when South Africans say, how is this even possible when they're supposedly accountants? Why are we even talking about phenomena such as accounting irregularities, creative accounting?
Well, those charged, and it underscores the fact that you can't just rely on auditors alone, because auditors come in at the end of the period, and they come only periodically to evaluate what has happened in an organization. Those that are charged with the responsibility to manage the company, the chief financial officers, those that play an oversight role, like the audit committees and the boards of directors, the internal auditors. We need all of these different aspects of an organization to function and function effectively if we are to have a chance of minimizing these irregularities. And we're doing some work in this regard as SAICA in order to make sure that we've got a better understanding of those aspects, but also we advocate for all of these functions to function properly so that we don't leave these things to auditors.
So to just give practical effect and an example of what we're talking about, what will be different, what is different now as SAICA looks at and perhaps is engaged with the issues coming out of Tongaat Hewlett, for example, where, you know, the allegation is that there was something similar to what happened with Steinhoff, right, in terms of misstating the assets and profits and revenue generation of the business. What will be different in how you look at it right now compared to, say, perhaps how you looked at Steinhoff at the end of 2017? What tools do you have now?
Well, essentially, we're going to have more time to look into those issues now than we did before. But also, we are strengthening our cooperation. We've always had this cooperation between ourselves, the JSE, and the other structures like ERBA and so on. And we are engaged in conversations with them where we are saying, what else can we do together to speed up these processes so that we can make sure that our capital markets have got integrity. And that, I think, will stand us in good stead going forward.
Do you ever encounter instances where it wasn't just dereliction of duty or perhaps ineptitude, where it was actually criminal? And in those instances, what happens?
Well, in the event that you are certain it's criminal, you've got to report it to the law enforcement agencies. Yeah. And the first part of your question is, do we ever discover where this is more than just negligence and all of those things? There's a very interesting point that came out of the discussion in the launch of Professor Nkutlu's book on Friday. And what Professor Nkutlu talks about is those instances where accounting irregularities occur year in, year out. And there has been a period of time over which, an extended period of time over which these things were happening. That begs the question, without prejudging and speculating in as to what normally drives that, but it then begs the question about the efficacy of the processes that are being employed. And it's all of those questions that we need to engage with and figure out what can be done to improve them.
But I guess what I'm asking is, have you had instances where you have reached that conclusion that we need to report this as potentially a criminal offense?
Well, I don't want to talk about cases that we work with, but there is one particular case that we have reported to the police. But the point is that when we find other cases, we are obliged in law to do so, and we intend doing that as well.
I know you're saying you don't want to talk about specific cases, but some of these cases are in the public domain. You had I don't know if it's the honor or dishonor of having amongst your members people such as Marcus Jooste and people such as Anuj Singh.
Yes.
What are you able to say to South Africans to say, we've been calling for accountability around these people and some of the allegations around them, but from your side of things, where do things stand with these two members?
We're dealing with all the cases, not just these two. The standoff case is still ongoing. There's still some work to be done to conclude it. We hope that in the next few months we should be in a position to bring those that are responsible for that case before our tribunal. In as far as the Transnet Eskom matter, which involved Anuj Singh, we have concluded that, and we have stricken him off the record of as a chartered accountant. He cannot use that designation anymore for the next 10 years at least, and if he wishes to do so 10 years down the line, he will have to convince SAICA that he now can uphold the principles that we believe in. So that other matter has been concluded, but the other one is still ongoing.
I'm wondering, to what extent do you have this conversation within your context as chartered accountants of the rotation of firms and also the issues around the transformation of the sector itself?
Yeah.
Because part of the conversation with the auditors is that there's a dominance that has been there. That means that if the big four are getting it wrong, you basically are in deeper trouble than you realize, because there's no space for smaller players to be able to play. Do you have a similar conversation?
We do have those conversations. In fact, today I wrote an op-ed into the Business Day. Although I don't talk about the audit firm rotation there, I do allude to another discussion that is taking place, which is about the having a multidisciplinary practice that also does consulting work. It is an issue that is of concern. It's been debated for the last 20 years at the very least. It is an issue that is being debated to this day. Audit firm rotation was debated 20 years ago. It's still being debated again today. The real issue in relation to this, rather than thinking about the policy instrument itself, is to think about what is it that you're trying to remedy. Now, the issue for me becomes where the interests of the client and the interests of the firm are aligned. It's very difficult for the firm to be objective. I think it makes sense. So if we come with a policy instrument that addresses that, it would make sense. Does audit firm rotation address that? To what degree does it do so? And does it address, the outlawing of consulting work and assurance work in the same place, as they are busy considering that in the UK the most appropriate instrument? We have to talk about these things and find the way forward. Now, to the extent that there are issues of transformation in South Africa, we also have to learn what has happened elsewhere. The Competition Market Authority in the UK last year decided to introduce a policy of deconcentration, and they said, okay, audits of entities above a certain size will be done by the Big Four, but audits of entities below a certain market capitalization will be done by smaller entities. That has got advantages, but also it's got its own disadvantages. Because where you make the cutoff, you might find that on the smaller entities, you don't have sufficient resources to be able to undertake that audit. Because when you do that audit, also you need to make sure that you are able to execute and execute it properly. Otherwise, you would be violating our code. So it is a discussion that we've got to have, and it is a discussion that we've got to approach, bearing in mind that South Africa is a different market. We're not going to just import what is happening elsewhere.
Yeah, that's an interesting discussion. Just talk to me about some of the developments inside the various corporates that we've touched on. Let me start with EOH. I saw a piece somewhere that was sort of suggesting that you've not really played the role that you could have played in as far as the irregularities that happened at EOH. What are you able to say about that?
Without sounding like a politician, every case that is relating to malfeasance that we've picked up in the media, that is reported to us, we are dealing with them. We're investigating all of those cases.
Yeah, so that would cover everything from EOH to Tongaat Hewlett,
as
you pointed out.
There is no case that we are not following up, irrespective of the parties involved and the people involved.
How big is your caseload? And we're nearing the completion of this interview. How big is your caseload? How, like, in terms of the efficiency of case management, you do talk about that these things take time, but is it a factor of there's just so many cases to deal with?
First and foremost, in the past 2 years, we would receive about 240 complaints per annum, thereabout. 230 of those will be the smaller cases that I was referring to earlier, minor infractions. And 9, 10, 11, thereabout would be the big cases or substantial cases. Now, what takes a lot of time is that, one, we have to investigate, we have to get information that relates to this. At times that information is not publicly available. You then have to approach the entities that have got the information for them to help you. They will come with all manner of privilege arguments with their lawyers in terms of accessing that information. When you've got the information, you also need witnesses and interview those witnesses, and aligning diaries and timetables does sometimes pose a challenge. So the bigger thing is the investigative part as opposed to the number of cases necessarily. The more complex the case is, obviously, the more difficult the investigation process that follows.
Right. So lastly, Mr. Nomvalo, let me ask you about what needs to happen to sort of strengthen your hand as regulators in some of these spaces. So the people who watch the hawks, as it were.
Yes.
Because the last thing we want is, you know, already we have a Steinhoff, which was really bad. We have a Tongaat Hewlett, which has been also quite bad, and also EOH. But the last thing we would want is a situation where the so-called accounting irregularities lead to a South African Enron.
Yeah. A few things. One, like I said, that we've done some work recently where we're looking at these cases, public sector, private sector cases. We've gone behind just the noise that is out there to understand some of the dynamics. And we believe strongly that all the structures within an organization have got to function. The CFO has got to do his job properly. The board of directors has got to oversee properly. Those that do the analysis of these stocks in order to invest people's monies have got to do their job a lot more diligently. I mean, some of the cases that have happened in this country, you wonder because the entity that is competing with the other entity would have been moving in the opposite direction in terms of valuing assets and so on, and the other entity is appreciating assets. Yes, people can claim that there is competitive advantage, but we need to understand that competitive advantage. I don't think everybody in the market is that dumb not to understand. So I think that there has to be a little bit more diligence, even at that analysis level, to understand these things. And of course, the oversight structures have got to function properly. The board of directors, the audit committees. Boards of directors have got a responsibility to interrogate what management gives them. And for that reason, they are fully entitled to get an independent opinion on what management is giving them. So it should not be an excuse that you only come there 4 times a year, you get a pack prepared by management. You should do your own work as the board of directors in order to satisfy yourselves that the information presented to yourselves is credible. You understand the business better. And then, of course, we as auditors, our members as auditors, have got to play that role as well. So I believe that all of these structures have got to function properly, and that is the work, that is the mission that we are engaging in as SAICA. And when we are ready, we will be announcing something on that.
So how do we hold you accountable then, as the South African public, tired of the erosion of our trust in institutions and professions that we should trust, without thinking twice about it? How do we hold you accountable as SAICA?
All the promises we make, we should keep. If we say we shall discipline somebody, we should discipline them without fear or favor. And if we don't do that, we should answer. I know I've said that it takes time to do these things, but we should be able to explain where the process is at and so on. And also, we have to be transparent. When the cases are concluded, we need to be able to announce those cases without exception, because then the public knows that we dealt with this case and this was the outcome. Whether we find that the person has done wrong or the person hasn't done anything wrong, we need to announce all of the cases.
And a few of the people in VBS were your members as well, right?
Oh yes, one of them is already no longer a member of SAICA because he was sequestrated. Our bylaws allow for that to be dealt with summarily, but the others are under investigation, and we're going to be pulling them before the disciplinary hearing as well soon.
All right. Mr. Nomvalo, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your insights here on the ENCA Corruption Scorecard.
Thank you very much.
So that is the accountant's side of the professions, the 2 professions. In the next few minutes, we'll delve deeper into the situation in as far as the auditing profession is concerned. My panel coming up next with Dr. Iraj Abedian and Bernard Agalas, who just finished his term as the head of the IRBA, the independent regulatory body for auditors. That is coming up in the next few minutes.